Wait, before we start, this other video made by a much bigger YouTuber came out while I was in the middle of making this video, so let me clarify that this video is not that video. That guy is reviewing real-life toy Pokedexes. I'm ranking the actual content of the in-game Pokedexes. Much different. I don't want anybody getting that twisted right off the bat, so let's all just calm down and enjoy the video. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. In my eyes, the Regional Dex is the single most important thing to get right in any Pokemon game. The Dex itself can sometimes single-handedly determine the replay value of the game. Are there a lot of Pokemon? Are a lot of them new? Are the types well balanced? These are all things to heavily consider. So today I'll be taking a look at every Regional Dex in Pokemon and ranking them from best to worst, but bear in mind that certain regions have multiple Dexes and that's something I'll also acknowledge. Let's get into it. So the Kanto region has had 3 distinctly different incarnations over the past 25 years, but only one regional Dex, which makes it kinda easy to rank, but at the same time kinda hard when you have to consider all the different contexts. Now, I got nothing to say about the Dex in Gen 1. It's the original Dex, it's iconic. Sure, there's a bit of a type imbalance, poison and water combined to make up 45% of the entire Dex. Meanwhile, there is only one line to represent both Ghost and Dragon, which are barely fleshed out types to begin with, but honestly, at the end of the day, it's a really good baseline, getting 150 right from scratch, plenty of variety for new players. Now, there is a problem with Pokemon distribution in Gen 1, but that's more of a problem for the region of Kanto than the Dex itself. Now, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, I understand why they didn't want to add any new Pokemon. It was an incredibly faithful remake, and changing the original 150, or 151, whichever floats your boat, it almost feels blasphemous. But still, there's some goofy stuff, like friendship is a mechanic that still exists in these games, but Crobat just isn't available until the post-game. It's a little easier to cover up stuff like Caesar or Steelix who require items, but it is a little disappointing, not gonna lie. Because you have to train your brain to be like, okay, these Pokemon that exist, they don't exist anymore, except they still exist, just not right at this exact moment. Yeah, like I said, it's goofy. Let's Go is even more of a mixed bag in this department. I do appreciate that they added the Alolan forms. It gives you an extra Ghost, extra Dragon, and some Steel and Dark types, which are all very scarce in Kanto, but only the player is able to use these during the main story. None of the NPCs have access to them until the post-game. So I feel like they didn't take full advantage of it. But I still think that leaving the evolutions out is a bit silly. Just think, they could have added all the Gen 4 evolutions and Sylveon. They could have radically changed Kanto for the better. Again, the original 151 is iconic, it's cool, but I don't know. When you're 2 remakes in, I think we gotta stop pretending that these are the only Pokemon. Regardless, I'm placing this at a solid C tier. It's a big Dex, it's a great baseline, not just for the region, but for the franchise as a whole. I think right in the middle is a fair placement. So, Johto technically has 2 Pokedexes, since Heart Gold and Soul Silver add a few species, but honestly they're so similar that I have no problem ranking them together. So, the Johto Regional Dex, at least in Gen 2, is literally all the Pokemon in existence. It's just the National Dex, but extremely out of order. Nobody bothered to tell Professor Elm that he was doing it wrong. Now yeah, not all of these Pokemon are accessible to the player, there's quite a few that are straight up unobtainable, especially in the originals, but the NPCs do have access to all of these. So, for example, the Kanto starters are in Johto's Regional Dex. You can't get them until post-game, but numerous trainers in the Johto region will still use them, and I think that's kinda cool. And honestly, this Dex doesn't get the recognition it deserves in my opinion. This was the largest regional Dex all the way until Black 2 and White 2 in 2012. This Dex was number 1 for 13 years. That's most of Pokemon's history. And then Heart Gold and Soul Silver just decided, hey, let's add Tangrowth, Mamoswine, Licky Licky, Yanmega, and Ambipom to the Dex, massively buffing some very underused Pokemon. I guess my only complaint here is, why didn't they just go all the way with the new evolutions? I would have loved to see Togekiss or the new Evolutions or Magnezone, but they inexplicably get left out. At the end of the day, it's still an upgrade to an already impressive Dex, but you know, go big or go home, I always say. Even by today's standards, I'm setting it in a solid A tier. Johto has a very good regional Dex. Hoenn is kind of the same deal as Johto. Oras added a few evolutions, but they're mostly the same dex, so I'm just gonna put them together. The Hoenn Dex consists of exactly 200 Pokemon, 135 new, 65 returning, or 211 Pokemon on Oras, adding in some Gen 4 evolutions and pre-evolutions. But this time they actually added all that they could, which is, well, exactly what they should have done. I think Hoenn introduces quite a few good new Pokemon, although there are a strange amount of gimmick Pokemon that most people probably wouldn't use on an average playthrough, like Castform and Kecleon and Wynot and Spinda and Love Disc. So yeah, they're not all great. So you may discover that the number of actually viable Pokemon in Hoenn is much smaller than it sounds. They also definitely gave Ice the short end of the stick here. Discounting Regice, there's only 2 lines of Ice types, that being the Spheal and Snorunt families. This was probably intentional since Hoenn has one of the warmer climates, but still a little disappointing though. My biggest gripe with this dex is the returning Pokemon. They chose some of the most basic Pokemon to come back, like Geodude and Zubat and Tentacool. Basically just the Pokemon that everyone were already tired of. And also, like, half the region is gonna be covered in water, and it will still be 90% Tentacool, and not any of the cool new water types this gen introduced. Although, again, more of a map problem than a dex problem, so I'll look past it. This dex certainly has its pros and cons. I do wish they sprung for a 250 Pokemon dex just so they could at least match Johto, and bring back some cooler old generation mons, but it's certainly serviceable. I'll drop it in the B tier. Sinnoh is our first region with 2 completely different dexes, the Diamond and Pearl Dex, which is also the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl Dex, sadly, and the Platinum Dex, which gave us an expansion. Starting with the Diamond and Pearl Dex, I'm sorry, I'm not even gonna keep you in suspense. It's bad, like, really bad. We go back down to only 150 species for the first time since Gen 1, tying it for the smallest regional dex in existence. For whatever odd reason, they just decided to gatekeep some of the new evolutions for the post-game. The only new evolutions present here are Ambipom, Mismagius, Honchkrow, and Weavile. Everything else, you'll have to wait until getting the National Dex. This means that only 81 of the 107 Gen 4 Pokemon are available during the main story. But that's just the beginning of our very sad tale. It's also the most unbalanced dex type-wise. Only 2 fully evolved fire types in the entire region, and if you're someone who likes using only new Pokemon, then it's just Infernape. Only 3 electric types, Pachirisu, Raichu, and Luxray. Yeah, you don't even get Rotom in Diamond and Pearl's dex. And this one often goes overlooked, but Garchomp is the only fully evolved dragon in Diamond and Pearl, discounting legendaries. I guess it's not as noticeable as Electric and Fire's problem, since there isn't a dragon-type specialist in this region. With the other 2, we can just look at Flint and Volkner's teams and go, oh, yeah, that's a problem. There's also a weird abundance of baby Pokemon in this dex just taking up space, and once again, they chose some of the worst Pokemon to come back, including our favorite trio, Geodude, Zubat, and Tentacool. Heck, even Wurmple's here for God knows what reason, taking up 5 entire dex slots with his overly large family. May not sound like a lot, but that's more than 3% of the Sinnoh dex being occupied by Wurmple and his relatives. I want you to think about that before you go to sleep tonight. The Diamond and Pearl dex gets a big, fat F. It's astoundingly bad. Now, the Platinum Dex, on the other hand, makes some considerable upgrades, bringing the total from 150 up to 210. I know, 60 species doesn't sound like a lot, but you'd be very surprised at the difference it makes. We get all of the evolutions added in, all the remaining Gen 4 Pokemon that were left out, Fire, Electric, and Dragon get rounded out relatively well, and they toss in a few fan favorites just for show, like Caesar, Absol, and, Tropius? He's just kind of chilling here. Yeah, who doesn't love Tropius? It still has its fair share of filler Pokemon and other problems that carried over from Diamond or Pearl, but by and large offers a great deal of variety, and plus probably the widest pool of strong, viable Pokemon that we had seen up until this point. I think the Platinum Dex goes up to a solid A tier. I do wish it was the tiniest bit bigger, but I'll take this over Diamond and Pearl's Dex any day of the week. Massive improvement. Oh, hey there. Are you enjoying the video? Good, because I have some very exciting news. Stick around till the end for a special announcement, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and like the video. It'll really help me out. Let's get back into it. Unova also gives us 2 different dexes to work with, so let's get right down to business. The base Unova Dex in Black and White was incredibly bold, giving us the largest new selection of Pokemon ever, and only new Pokemon. This gave us a smaller dex than we're used to today, but I think they more than made up for it with the fresh feeling of encountering something new in every location. It's also remarkably well balanced despite being entirely new Pokemon. There aren't any types that get left behind like in Diamond and Pearl. Dragon type and Ghost type finally felt like they caught up to the other types in this generation, and Bug types received a huge overhaul. No longer were Bugs seen as the frail beginners type in Unova, instead they came packing with a fleet of strong designs. I will admit, although there aren't any old Pokemon here, some do feel like tired retreads, like Roggenrola and Timber are quite literally reincarnations of Geodude and Machop. I guess they were just trying to keep some of the classic Pokemon DNA and familiarity in the game. Still not my favorite additions though. But overall, a really solid attempt at a complete reboot. Almost every Pokemon in this region is viable in some way or another, making it one of the most versatile dexes yet. I'll place this one in the B tier. Black 2 and White 2 turn up the heat quite a bit though, not only keeping the 150 Pokemon added in the previous game, but also adding in 150 old Pokemon. And they actually spice up their returning picks quite a bit. Aside from Zubat, they shift the spotlight onto a lot of other old Pokemon. It feels like the perfect blend of all-star Pokemon past and present. For its time, this was easily the best Pokedex yet, but admittedly the bar has been raised over time, so I can only give this one an A tier. You'll see what's ahead. Unova may have finally broken Johto's record with an impressive dex of 300 species, but Kalos absolutely shattered that ceiling with a staggering 450. A dex so large it had to be split into 3 separate parts. To this day, more than 8 years later, this is still the largest regional dex in existence. That alone earns this dex some high marks. Wow, JPR finally said something positive about the Kalos region. It's a Christmas miracle! But wait, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the new Pokemon. Kalos would only introduce 72 new Pokemon, discounting the mythicals and legendaries, only 66. Granted, I think almost all of these new Pokemon are really solid from a viability aspect as well as a design aspect. It just really bothers me that you can go an incredibly long period of time without seeing a new Pokemon. Discovering new Pokemon is truthfully my favorite part of the experience every time a new generation rolls around. A lot of the returning Pokemon feel like filler too. Sure, we have almost every pseudo-legendary Pokemon available, but we also have almost every rodent and basic insect too. Roughly an hour into the game, you've only seen about 6 new Pokemon because everything else is just the old stuff that you're more than familiar with. Placement of certain Pokemon is kinda wonky too, like Axew and Gible are relatively early game Pokemon, but Fearow and Spinda are at the end of the dex? I already didn't want to use them, putting them at the end makes them feel even more pointless. The Mega Evolutions are also a thing, but you only have access to 5 of them during the main story. Your Kanto starter, Lucario, Gengar, Ampharos, and Abomasnow. Like, that's this generation's whole selling point, yet 25 out of 30 are locked to the post-game. I really have to question that decision. Overall, definitely the best dex in terms of quantity, but quality is more of a question. For that, this one also goes in the A tier. Of course, next we head to Alola, which also has 2 different dexes. The base Sun and Moon dex consists of 300 Pokemon, so a bit of a step down from X and Y, but still pretty decent. This region does suffer from the same issue that Kalos did though. Not a ton of new Pokemon. If you remove the Ultra Beasts and Legendaries, there's only 63 brand new species, although if you add in Alolan forms, which are much more accessible than Mega Evolutions, that's 81, which is actually the number of Gen 7 Pokemon that there would normally be. So roughly 1 out of every 3 to 4 Pokemon you'll be seeing here is new, which is a much better ratio. The returning Pokemon are kinda hit and miss. You get some really popular fan favorites, but again, a decent amount of filler mons. It's still really good, almost on the same level as Black 2 and White 2's decks, but I do think it's a little underwhelming for 2016 compared to 2012, so I'm setting this one at a high B tier. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon give us a whole 100 additional Pokemon though, bringing the total up to 400. They also give you access to a brand new Pokemon before the story even ends, that being Poipole, which is a first for a mid-generation game. The returning 100 Pokemon are almost entirely hits too, like there are so many cool Pokemon that come back. Zoroark, Ampharos, Volcarona, literally every fossil Pokemon, some pseudo-legendaries, I could go on and on. Fun fact by the way, you can actually obtain every single type of Pokemon before you've even left Melee Island. Sun and Moon almost did that, but they were missing Ice. I've tried Nuzlocking Ultra Sun a few times, and it honestly feels like you can't go wrong with anything you encounter. The options are so good, which I feel is important given that Ultra Sun and Moon are among the harder caliber Pokemon games. It's big, it has a decent amount of new stuff, it's perfectly balanced, as all things should be, and I think this dex is definitely our first entry in the S tier. Well done, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And finally, the Galar Regional Dex. I was debating whether or not to include the DLC dexes as well, but honestly, I feel like that's not really fair. It wasn't originally in the game, plus you're probably not using those Pokemon on an average playthrough, so let's just stick to the base dex of 400 Pokemon. National Dex controversy aside, I think we gotta marvel at this Regional Dex quite a bit. Including Galarian forms and excluding legendaries, there's 91 new Pokemon to encounter in the base game, which is the highest number since Gen 5. I may get some flack for this statement because it's always hip and popular to hate on new Pokemon, it doesn't matter what year you're living in, but I think if Sword and Shield did one thing right, it's the new designs. They feel really inspired, particularly by British lore, and most of them have an ability or type combination that helps them stand out among the crowd. I'd argue it's probably the most unique crowd of new designs, even the Galarian forms, some of which give us our first regional evolution since Gen 4, so that's pretty exciting. And thanks to the Wild area, you can obtain every type Pokemon very early in the game, similar to Alola. And most of the returning Pokemon are very solid. Not a lot of gimmicks here, just good, usable Pokemon. Now, was this worth losing the National Dex for? Well, I'll let you decide on that one, Chief. At the very least, this Regional Dex is every bit as good as Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, so I gotta place this one in the S tier as well. And before you call me a corporate shill bootlicker in the comments section, remember that I did rank Galar in last place in my Ranking Every Regions video last year. I may not like the region itself, but I think even the most bitter Pokemon fans can remove their hatred goggles and see that this dex is actually quite solid. But hey, that's just my opinion. If you disagree, then by all means give your own tier list in the comments section down below. But on your way down, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because we got a ton of new content coming up with the release of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. That's right, for the first time since 2013, I'll actually be playing the new games on my channel, Nuzlocking them as a matter of fact. So I hope you're really excited to see that. I think a day one Nuzlocke is either going to go brilliantly, or I'll die trying. Episode 1 comes out on launch day, and then subsequent episodes on every Monday and Wednesday through the end of the year. But don't worry, because your regularly scheduled videos will still be coming out every Friday. There'll be a little something for everyone. Hope you're as excited as I am, and I'll see you guys back here next week with the start. See you guys next time.